Well, good morning. Welcome to Illawarra Suicide Prevention and Awareness Network, known as iSPAN. Brian here again, another live broadcast. I have with me Mariette from Mission Australia. We'll introduce Mariette properly shortly. Again, want to welcome you and just let you know that I have no way of monitoring this. My wife isn't with me this time to tell me what's going on. And I had technical failure with my iPad that I'm looking at right now, and so I can't see the actual transmission. So I'm hoping this is going to air. Tell you what I'll do is I'll just step out of view for a minute, and it appears to be recording. So just thought I don't want to sit here for 30 minutes talking to. I don't mind talking to Mariette for 30 minutes. That's okay, but. You know, the point is so that you can actually hear us. Look, I hope you're all keeping well during this time of restrictions. I know that the restrictions have lifted somewhat, but as you can see, we're still looking at those restrictions as being necessary, some of them. We may be able to visit people and go out and certain shops opening. However, I think it's important to be aware that when you are in company to still observe those restrictions like the social distancing. So I measured this out as approximate as I could using my traditional metre measurement. So we're pretty close to 1.5 meters. We've checked our temperatures and we have our sanitizer here. So we're all set to go. I hope you're doing the same. This is all about, iSPAN is all about working towards preventing suicide in the Illawarra. And during the time of restrictions, there are still people who are still isolated, still lonely. There are elderly people who were having visitors who aren't now. Nursing homes and places like that are restricting visitation. So there's still people who are feeling very isolated, and it's a very important time for us to remember that and to have some contact with those people. Not all of them, and even younger people, not all of them have the technology and are available on the internet. So let's look out for one another. Let's remember to ask some questions about how people are going, how they are, how they're feeling, and especially if they talk about things like, what's the point of life at the moment? What's the point of it all? I may as well not be here. Comments like that we talk about in suicide prevention education, which are leading questions that need you to respond with, are you actually thinking about harming yourself? It sounds to me like you're thinking about not living any longer. Are you actually considering taking your own life? Getting right to the point. In our education programs, we talk about getting to the point and not being afraid to ask the hard question. Research over decades and multiple countries everywhere. I can't stress enough, research shows that you will not encourage someone to go ahead and take their own life if you ask them if that's what they're thinking. So you will not plant the idea in their head if they didn't already have the idea. You will not encourage them to do it by asking them, but it will lead you to a conversation that might just save their life. So just keep that in mind. There will be an announcement later on Facebook in a couple of days about an upcoming education program that will be done live. It will be done on a Zoom style meeting where I will actually be able to see the people who are participating, so I can see how you're responding, and you'll be able to interact with one another as well as with the presenter, whether that's me or someone else. So stay tuned for that. What we're going to do today is talk about the area of gambling. We're going to talk about that with Mariette and how that relates to suicide and suicide prevention. In my previous experience with a crisis care organisation a couple of decades back, I can remember experiences where we had people who had severe gambling debts or where they'd embezzled money and were facing jail time. I talk about that in my training sessions too, where that's a clear trigger for some people to say, well, I don't want to go to jail, I'd rather die. So I do have that experience. I can relate to that in that we have dealt with those people. This is not fictitious. We don't make these things up. People do get into those situations, and often in that that crisis, in that distress, in that situational distress, see only one way out. It's our job as friends and loved ones to help them get past that point. So I'm going to ask Mariette to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she does in Mission Australia, and I'll just let her answer it, see how she does.
Okay, so thank you, Brian, for inviting me, and good morning everyone that's watching. So as Brian said, my name is Mariette, and I'm the Gambling Help Counsellor, one of quite a few that works with Mission Australia in Wollongong in the Illawarra. So our role is to provide confidential, face-to-face counselling in a very professional manner. We have multiple years of experience, so my experience in gambling has been over 10 years. Prior to that, I did a lot of volunteer work with an organisation called Family Drug Support, helping families and loved ones dealing with someone else's addictions. And then even before that, I was a registered nurse.
Right.
So it was the fact while I was nursing that my passion grew around counselling. I was interested. What made some people listen to advice and change behaviour and others not? So that's where that grew. Like I said, we have multiple offices in the Illawarra region, and I'll go through them in a little bit. So yeah.
So Mariette comes to us then with a wealth of experience, not just in one area, but through the nursing and through those different things where she can draw on that experience, which is really important. But it's not only Mariette's experience, but it's the experience of the team that she works with that she brings into a situation as well.
Yeah.
So Mariette, tell us a bit about Mission Australia,
Okay.
and I know it used to be called Sydney City Mission.
Yeah.
I actually worked for them back when it was called Sydney City Mission, but I was in Campbelltown, not in Sydney, so which was really confusing. Mission Australia seems to be a good all-round name for it. So tell us a bit about the organisation and what you offer, perhaps a brief overview of nationally, and then what you offer locally.
Okay. So, and I will refer to some notes, so I just want to make sure I get that right. So basically, Mission Australia's been around quite a while, and as you said, Brian, it's undergone quite a few changes, but they now call it Mission Australia because they see it needed to have a name that enveloped the whole of the nation, because it is a national organisation, it's a non-government organisation, and they've been around for over 160 years, and their main reason for being around was to actually help those in need, so the disadvantaged families and children, homelessness, people with mental health issues, and I guess also other dependencies, and that's where gambling came in. When the Responsible Gambling Fund was born, I think in the late 80s, there was that opportunity to apply for funding to help those with a gambling issue and loved ones that have been impacted. So Mission Australia was one of those non-government organisations that got some of that funding all that time ago. And like you, I started with Mission Australia in Campbelltown, but now I'm down in Wollongong. So I've worked with them for quite some time. So I guess locally, we have 4 areas where we can see clients. So we have our main office in Wollongong, and then we have an office in Shell Harbour, we have an office in Nowra, and then also the capacity to see people in Ulladulla. So we go quite a fair distance down. We will be posting that information, I believe, online as well.
We
but
can
I'll
make
give
that
that info
available
as well
on the Facebook page, on the iSPAN Facebook page a little later on today.
Yeah. So I guess at a more local level, what does that look like if someone was to attend our service? Currently, we are, because of the situation at the moment with COVID-19, we are actually offering phone sessions instead of face-to-face, although we will be transitioning now. We've been given a plan on how to work through that, so using that 1.5 metres, checking how people's health are, having cleaning the office and things like that we'll be doing. But currently it is phone sessions. So most sessions go for about an hour, and it's to look at what the situation is, what's going on for that person, what is it that they need. One of the things I will say is family members are entitled to come as well, and it's a free service for anyone being impacted by gambling. So it's not just the person with the gambling issue.
Okay.
So often what can happen is family members will go, my son, daughter, whoever is gambling, but they just won't admit it, I don't know what to do, I need them to get help. But if they're not ready, pushing them into a service often doesn't have good outcomes. So family members can come, and what we do is help you to think about how would you have that discussion with them. And at the same time, often family members are experiencing anxiety and a whole range of emotions that they sometimes want help and support with as well. So we can do that as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Back in, like I said, in the crisis care organisation that I worked with previously in previous decades, one of the things we did was we didn't have government. The government funding we had, we would have lasted about 3 weeks if we didn't have any other money. So it was pretty pathetic, really. But that was then. This was 30 years ago. And one of the things we did was we offered food hampers for people, and people would ring in, and we would take their details. And at the end of the day, the senior staff, we would sit down and discuss them, and we had a limited amount that we could do each day. So we actually had to choose who we were going to give that hamper to. And I remember delivering one to a lady, and what happens is that we talk in counselling about the presenting problem and the real problem. And this lady saying, I can't feed my kids. I can't feed my kids. I don't have any food left in the house, and I have no money. She was distressed about that. So we immediately give the food, and then we can get to what's going on. And what's going on was the husband had gambled away all the money. So she was impacted and affected directly by that. The whole family was, because she now can't feed them. So if we just treat that first presenting thing, we think, great, we've given her a box of food, off you go, she's okay now. But then you need to get to the real issue. So it's really good to know that you support not just the person with the problem, but also support the people who are affected by it.
Well, the research actually shows that if family members are supportive and can understand more what is happening for the person with the issue, then they have a better outcome. I think one of the things that's really important to see, people with a severe gambling problem, it isn't a weakness of character. It is an actual diagnosed mental health disorder, and we know it changes the way the brain works. Just like as if they would be taking and ingesting a drug. And I think that's a really important thing for people to know. But you're right, family members are often the ones trying to make sense of what's going on and trying to pay bills and find money for food and rent and everything else. And if you just treat that, then you don't get to that underlying problem and can't continue to help that family. And I think that's where the government went, no, we need to help and support those that are being impacted by somebody close to them. Because if we don't, then we'll never get a chance of getting that person into some form of help.
Mariette talked about the family being supportive of the person and understanding where it's coming from. Not supporting their habit, not supporting the problem, but supporting the person to work through that, rather than being combative, if you like, because of how it's affecting them, which I fully understand. If my wife gambled away all of our money, then I may be combative about that and say, what are you doing? And I may attack her for that, if I can use that word. Whereas if I get beyond that and can support her in dealing with it, that is really important. So if you're in a situation yourself, or if your clients, if your friends, if your loved ones are in a situation where they're dealing with a problem gambler that they're close to, encourage them to get the help that for themselves first, so that they can deal with their issue and then they can actually, as Mariette said, support the person in getting the help they need.
Yeah.
Is that fitting what you're saying?
Yeah, that is, because it is important. It is fully understandable that family members get really angry, frustrated, annoyed, and might attack the person verbally, and all the rest. Like you said, that combative nature comes out. Why have you done this? If you'd loved me enough, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
All of that, and it's important to be able to, I guess, come to a private session and be able to talk about all of that and not be judged for it, and then look at, well, what would you like to see happen in this situation? How can we both together work to move beyond that, and how to help this situation? And that's the important thing. So that's one of the many things that we need to look at. Yeah.
Terrific. So we're basically relating this through this whole conversation. We're relating the gambling issue, problem gambling issue, to a mental health issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even though in my training sessions I talk about, I separate to some degree mental health and suicide. We tend to have this, over the last couple of decades, we've had the medical model where anytime we mention the word suicide, it was automatically mental illness and a mental health issue. I'm personally anti that, and in my training sessions I'm anti. I'm not anti the medical side of it. I'm not anti the fact that mental illness contributes to the risk of suicide. I'm not anti mental health treatment. What I'm anti is treating it as the only relationship to suicide.
Yeah.
And what we found is that there are things where it's situational. The person who suddenly finds themselves in a situation like that, there's that mental side of it, that connection that you spoke about, that's not working properly, and so now it is a mental health issue. And so we relate that to the suicide issue, because it becomes a risk factor then.
Yeah.
It becomes a risk factor when, as I said a little while ago, with people who find themselves in such debt and they say, well, my family would be better off without me, is a common line that I've heard. And when I say I've heard, I have worked in direct intervention, in crisis support. I've led call-out teams to people. So when I refer in my sessions and in these sessions about things people say, almost everything I will relate, I've actually heard myself. Okay, so some of it other professionals have heard, other people have heard, ordinary non-professionals who have just dealt with people have heard. So these are very real things, and people will say things like that. So it's really important when you hear comments like that to understand that it is very serious, and that whether or not you see a sign of a mental health issue, it is still a suicide issue. It is still an issue that needs to be addressed and dealt with.
And I think you're right, Brian, that if you think about someone who's gambling on a regular occurrence and putting a lot of their money into it, they really have that belief that any moment their win will come, because that's what started them on that trajectory, that road of gambling, was that they had that early win, which basically hooks into their pleasure centre, their reward centre. So there's a belief that it will happen again and it will fix all my problems. So like you said, people will often have huge amount of debt. They're hiding it from families, could have multiple credit cards. I've even dealt with clients that have unfortunately had to go to jail because of the amount of money that they've stolen. And you're right, by the time they've come to see me and I ask them around suicide and questions around it, quite a number of them have said, I have thought about it, but they haven't thankfully gone and done that. And it is, I guess, for them, reaching out and getting that help was really important. And the reason for this discussion is just for people to be aware, to have the conversations around, are you okay? And then follow that up and get them the help that they need, whether it's due to gambling or anything else. Is really doesn't matter. It's about getting that help. Yeah. And
to reiterate, it's not a weakness of character.
No.
It's just the same as someone who has clinical depression. It's not a weakness of character. Someone who has an anxiety disorder, it's not a weakness of character. Someone who has bipolar or schizophrenia, it's not a weakness of character. Someone who has a severe gambling problem, who cannot resist the idea of that bet, that gamble, whatever kind of gambling it is, well, it's a bet, whatever way it's a three-letter word, bet. Whatever it is, it's not a weakness of character. It's an issue of the brain that needs to be dealt with like any other mental health issue. Is that right?
That's right. And what we do is we look at that and we actually address it, look at their triggers, look at what we can do around that. If they've got severe depression, anxiety, we look at, do they need to have a mental health plan? Do they need to go to their GP for any medication? Do they require other support while still seeing us? So it is, we look at them as a holistic picture. We don't just address the gambling, because often there will be lots of other issues there as well. So we do address the other issues, and if we think that other organisations or other professionals need to be involved, we'll have that discussion with that person and refer them, because we want to make sure that they're well wrapped around and looked after. That's
excellent. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
I had a question I do want to throw at you.
Sure.
Just off the notes.
Yeah, that's fine.
and without becoming accusatory at anyone or any organisation, are gambling situations like the pokies set up to suck you in, to draw you in?
Look, I think there's a lot of information out there. Poker machines are developed to increase your enjoyment. So what I have found over the 10 years, every single person I've dealt with has had that significant early win, be it the pokies, be it sports betting, be it the horses, but they've had a significant early win, and you could almost see that shift in their brain, in their thought process, that, oh my gosh, I could actually win a lot of money doing this. And what then happens is that the brain continues to want to try and replicate that natural high that they've gotten.
Right.
Because I remember with a client who was quite elderly, asking her, can you remember your first win gambling? This was an elderly person, and straight away I could see the change in stature and their look. And they described a situation where they were 15, placed a bet on for their father at the back of the butcher shop, because that's where the legal bookies were. And the dad had given them some money, and they placed it on the same horse. Won what for back then was a significant amount of money for this 15-year-old. And from that point on, there was this constant love and belief that the next horse is going to win. And that went on for multiple years, and it was around looking at, well, what are the thought processes, what can we do? There are other things that we can do as well. So there's what's called multi-venue self-exclusion, where you can set up, as counsellors, we can set up 30 venues in one go, and we can get that increased to a higher number, where people can put down, nominate how long they're excluded from that venue, either fully from the whole venue or just from the gaming. So they can come in and do that as well. But I realise I've gone off the original question a little bit, so I apologise.
Okay.
But I guess, look, pokies are still the number one issue. And the reason being for that is, one, they're readily available, they're everywhere, and you can put a large sum of money in. And I think the reason why people are drawn to them, you get an instant result. You press the play button, within seconds you know whether you've won or not.
Yeah.
What has been interesting is, since COVID-19 and the venues have been closed, obviously there's no money going to those. Most of my clients have not switched. There's only been a very small percentage that have switched to online gambling. However, we are hearing reports that online gambling, through the legal aspects at least, like Bet365, Ladbrokes, all of those, their increase has gone up quite a lot.
So the people who were doing both are putting more into that, it seems, but a large percentage are not gambling at all, is the thinking.
We're not sure. I guess that's the thing, is all we know is that the revenue has gone up for those sorts of things.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
It is just interesting.
People are betting on all sorts of things. I heard the other day, people are betting on what colour tie the Prime Minister will wear in the next in his next press conference.
Yeah.
You know, the things people will bet on, it's nuts.
Look, it is. It's no longer just the horses or the dogs anymore. It will go into some very bizarre and strange things that they bet on.
I bet you've heard some really...
I've heard some wonderful
stories. What would be the strangest thing you've heard someone betting on? Just to digress just a little.
Some of I guess, when people start chasing their losses, so when they realise how much money they've lost, it's almost like this massive urgency to get that money back, so they will gamble on anything and everything anywhere. And I guess a client that comes to mind, they said they were going on overseas websites. They did not even know what they were betting on, and then they realised that they had bet on, I think it was when Kate and William were having their first baby, what sex it would be and the date.
Right.
That it would be born, and we're going, never ever thought I'd be one of those people doing that, but I did. What the heck?
Yeah.
But for them, that was a wake up call that, hang on, this is actually serious if I have to be doing that. So
that's a good segue into the next question, the wake up call. Someone who realises, someone who's listening now, or a result of someone who is watching this. Going and talking to someone who then realises that they do need to do something, what to do. If you or a loved one needs help, what to do.
So there's a few things. You could actually phone our Wollongong office, and like I said, all this information will be posted online, but our Wollongong office number is 4267 6600.
Now, if I was really clever, I would have that appear on the bottom of the screen now, but as this is live, not pre-recorded, I won't be able to do that.
But we will have it all up. The other thing too is, if you're watching this and you go, well, that's great, but I'm not in the Illawarra region, then there is the gambling helpline. So their number is 1800 858 858, and that's Australia-wide. They are there 24 hours a day, and they can either, you can go on even onto their website, and again we will have those links up, and look up, you can put your postcode in and it'll tell you what the closest free gambling services are in your area, or you can phone them and they will let you know. They have resources up on there as well. But if you're not even sure, you're a family member or a loved one, and you're not sure, how can I get them to see that there's an issue, give us a call. Pick up the phone, give us a call, come in for a session, or we have a phone session with you, and we can go through that for you and look at, well, what is your situation? What is it that you require? Because there's no one formula that fits all. We're all complex. We have different needs, different families. So we would prefer to speak with the person and actually find out what it is that we need.
The other question is, does this cost anything?
No, so it's totally free. Currently unlimited number of sessions. So I know because I've only just started in Wollongong, but when I was in Campbelltown, I had people that saw me for about a year, and then they deemed that they had been doing well, so we could stop the sessions. But then every now and then they would phone and go, look, this has happened, could I just have a chat over the phone, or could I come back in for a session or two? So we've got that capacity as well. So remember, it is free, unlimited number of sessions, totally confidential, and we will endeavour with all of our experience to help you in any way that we can. And if we can't, then we will refer you to a service that can. So, yeah.
Now, I know that a lot of people who actually will watch this actually workers themselves in services, in community, in the sector, if you like. So I guess my comment there is, again, from my previous experience as a senior staff member in a crisis service, I can tell you very clearly, we are just as susceptible to these problems, if I can use that word, to just as one word, we are just as susceptible to these problems, and sometimes even more so. Need an outlet? What do? Go off and do a bit of gambling, play some roulette, a few cards, whatever it is. And please, I'm not saying that we should never do that. Okay, I'm not saying it's evil to do any of that. That's not my place. Okay, and I will admit that on a recent cruise, I set aside a certain amount of recent, not that recent. I should stress that. I did set aside a certain amount of money, as this is my enjoyment money for these few days. When that was gone, it was gone. And it did go, but it was my fun. So I'm not saying that you should never do that. So please don't say Brian said we should never do that. Perhaps we shouldn't. I've not yet come to grips with that. But I guess my point is, where at some point, if that to me becomes something I can't do without because of the stress of the job I do, and I get the relief over here, and then it begins to take over, then it becomes a problem. And so us workers in the community sector are just as susceptible. So if you or someone you know, and pass on this information, just want to chat and say, what do I do? Or you have a client or a loved one or a friend who you're concerned about, ring Mariette's team, have a chat, get some information. It's anonymous, unless you choose for it not to be, and just start to utilise services that are there. Now, before I wrap up, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, just if your organisation or you're in a community group would like somebody to come out and give a talk around gambling and
cool.
what that means, we can actually do that as well. So obviously at the moment we can't, so we're actually doing things via Zoom with some presentations. But yeah, if you're an organisation and you would like some further information because you're not sure if some of your clients fit the category, then, or you just want more information, we can come to staff meetings, we can give that talk and presentation around that. And Brian, you're right, that we're not here as gambling counsellors to say you cannot gamble. We're here to support those that have put their hand up and go, I think I'm spending too much money. And for some people that may be $50, for other people it may be more than that. So it is, am I spending more time and more money on that activity that I want to, and it's now impacting my family and others, and I'm not interacting with them? And is it impacting me, as in I'm getting quite anxious, depressed, can't sleep, financial issues, they're the things. So is it making an impact? That's what we're more about, and we do that in a non-judgmental way.
Terrific. It's been great having Mariette here for this broadcast. So thank you for coming in and taking the time this morning, because the set up time and everything to be here early, and everything is taking time out of your actual work. So I appreciate that. Okay. These subjects that we're covering in these broadcasts, they're important subjects that relate to what we do as the Suicide Prevention and Awareness Network. We are part of the Wesley Group, so we're connected in a far broader way than just simply being an isolated group. We do relate to a larger organisation. We are an independent group, and we choose what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. If you're interested in hearing more about the group, like the Facebook page, and you'll be kept up to date with what's happening. Contact us through the Facebook page if you like, or you can easily find me. I'm not hard to find on Facebook, or I'm not on much other social media. I just use Facebook because it's a way to do things like this and keep in touch with people. But get in touch, have a chat, find out what we do. Join our next monthly Zoom meeting that will go out on the Facebook page as well. If you are part of an organisation, whether or not you're a member of iSPAN at the moment, if you're an organisation that feels you'd like to share what you do and how it relates to suicide prevention, then please get in touch. I'd like to have more people on this. Next week we're having Anne Mills, who's a psychologist, and she's done a lot of work in the area of children and grief. So we're going to be talking to Anne about suicide, grief and children. So that's next week's broadcast. Anne has, we'll introduce her properly next week, but she basically wrote the program for kids, for the kids grief camp called Camp Magic. And so she's responsible basically for that. her and some others, but she was the chief writer, I believe. We will confirm that next week, but I believe she's responsible for that, wrote a parent program to go alongside of that. So we'll be specifically covering that issue of children and grief next week. So tune in for that, and that should be a really interesting session. Please get in touch if you'd like to be involved in this, or if you have any questions or comments whatsoever. So without making it go any longer, I'd like to keep to a certain amount of time. Once again, thank you. And now I have to exit the frame so I can go around and turn it off because I don't have a cameraman. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mariette.
Thank you, Brian.